The gunshot echoed through the dusty chapel just as Delilah Monroe tried to bolt for the door, and she knew in that instant her last chance at escape had died with the sound. It was August of 1882 in Quartzsite, Arizona, and the heat pressed down on everything like a physical weight. Delilah stood at the altar in a dress that felt more like a shroud, her hands trembling as Silas Thornton gripped her wrist hard enough to leave bruises. The preacher droned on, his words blurring together while sweat rolled down her spine. She was 20 years old, and this was supposed to be the day her father's gambling debts were finally paid. The currency was her freedom. Silas was 53, his breath reeking of whiskey even at noon, his eyes cold as a winter snake. He owned half the mining operations around Quartzsite and most of the politicians who mattered. When her father had lost everything at Silas's poker table 3 months ago, the old man had smiled and said he would forgive the debt for a price. That price stood trembling in a borrowed wedding dress, trying not to vomit. "Do you take this, man?" the preacher said, and Delilah felt the words like a noose tightening. "She does," Silas answered for her, squeezing her wrist until she gasped. The preacher hesitated, glancing at Delilah's pale face. "The bride needs to answer herself, Mr. Thornton." "I said she does." Silas's voice dropped to something dangerous. "Unless you want to find yourself without a position in this town, preacher." Delilah opened her mouth, not sure if she was going to scream or agree or just start sobbing, when the chapel doors burst open with such force they slammed against the walls. Sunlight flooded in, blinding everyone for a moment, and a figure stepped through the brightness like something out of a fever dream. "This wedding is over," the man said, his voice carrying across the small chapel with absolute authority. Delilah blinked against the light, trying to see who had just interrupted her nightmare. As her eyes adjusted, she made out a tall figure in dusty traveling clothes, a worn hat pulled low over his face. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who knew how to handle himself, his hand resting near the revolver at his hip. "Who the hell are you?" Silas snarled, finally releasing Delilah's wrist. "Name's Marcus Everett," the stranger said, stepping further into the chapel. Now Delilah could see him properly. He was younger than Silas by decades, maybe 26 or 27, with sun-weathered skin and eyes that were an unusual shade of gray-green, like sagebrush after rain. "And I am here on behalf of the Territorial Marshal to inform you that your mining operation is under investigation for fraud and murder." The words hung in the air like smoke. Silas's face went from red to purple. "That is a lie. You have no authority here." Marcus reached into his vest and pulled out a badge that caught the light. "Deputy Marshal, actually, and I have plenty of authority. You have been stealing claims from homesteaders and having anyone who complained run out of the territory or worse. We found 3 bodies in that canyon east of your primary mine. Figured it was time someone looked into your business practices." "You cannot prove anything," Silas said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "Actually, I can. Your foreman turned witness 2 days ago in Yuma, told us everything about the claim jumping, the murders, and about you forcing this young woman into marriage to settle a rigged gambling debt." Marcus's eyes shifted to Delilah, and something in his expression softened. "You are Delilah Monroe?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Your father's debt was based on a card game that was provably fixed. We found marked cards in Silas's office. That debt is not legal, and neither is this wedding." Silas lunged for the gun at his belt, but Marcus was faster. His revolver was out and aimed before Silas's fingers even touched metal. "I would not do that if I were you." "You have no right," Silas hissed. "This is my town. These people work for me." "Not anymore." Marcus gestured with his free hand toward the door, where 2 more men had appeared, both wearing badges. "Take him!" What happened next was chaos. Silas tried to fight as the deputies moved in, shouting threats and curses. Someone in the small crowd of witnesses that Silas had forced to attend started yelling. The preacher backed away from the altar, holding his Bible like a shield. And Delilah, feeling the world tilt sideways, felt her knees give out. She hit the floor hard, her vision going spotty. The dress tangled around her legs, the too tight bodice making it hard to breathe. She heard voices above her, felt hands trying to help her up, but her body would not cooperate. 3 months of constant fear, of knowing this day was coming, and being powerless to stop it, had finally caught up with her. Then strong arms slid under her shoulders and knees, lifting her easily. She found herself being carried, cradled against a chest that smelled like leather and sage and honest sweat. Marcus's voice rumbled above her, low and gentle. "I have got you. You are safe now." He carried her out of the chapel into the blazing afternoon sun, away from Silas's rage and the stunned faces of the witnesses. He did not stop until they were in the shade of the building next door, where he carefully set her down on a bench. Delilah tried to stand immediately, some instinct telling her to run now while she had the chance, but her legs were still shaking. Marcus knelt in front of her, his hat pushed back so she could see his face properly. "Easy," he said. "You are free now. You do not have to marry him. You do not owe him anything. You are free now." The words did not make sense at first. Delilah stared at this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere and upended her entire terrible reality. "I do not understand. The debt was not legal. The game was fixed. Your father was cheated." Marcus spoke slowly, making sure she heard every word. "And even if it had been legal, you cannot be sold to pay someone else's gambling debts. That is not how the law works, Miss Monroe." But Silas said, "Silas Thornton is a criminal and a liar. He has been using his money and influence to get away with whatever he wants for years. But that ends today." Marcus reached out slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted, and gently took her hand. "You are free. Do you understand? No one can force you to marry anyone." Delilah felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been locked tight for 3 long months. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. "My father. Where is my father?" "In Yuma, staying with your aunt. We moved him there 2 weeks ago for his own safety while we built our case. He wanted to come get you himself, but we could not risk Silas finding out what we knew before we were ready to move." "He is safe?" Delilah's voice broke on the words. "He is safe, and he is sober. Your aunt runs a boarding house, and she has been keeping him busy and away from cards and drink. He asked me to tell you he's sorry, said he knows sorry is not enough, but it is all he has." Delilah closed her eyes, trying to process everything. Her father was safe. She did not have to marry Silas. She was free. The concepts felt too big, too impossible after months of feeling trapped. What happens now? Now, Silas gets transported to Yuma to stand trial. You can go to your aunt's boarding house if you want, or stay here if you have other family. That is your choice. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "Everything from here on out is your choice, Miss Monroe." Before Delilah could respond, one of the other deputies appeared around the corner. "Marcus, we got a problem. Some of Thornton's men are gathering outside the jail. They are not happy about this." Marcus's jaw tightened. He stood, his hand moving to his gun. "How many?" 8, maybe 10. Could get ugly. Take Miss Monroe somewhere safe. The boarding house at the end of the street, the one with the blue door. Mrs. Chen runs it. She will look after her." Marcus looked down at Delilah. "Stay there until this is settled. I will come find you when it is done." "Wait," Delilah said, struggling to her feet. The world swayed but held steady. "Those men, they will kill you. Silas pays them well, and they are loyal." "That is my job, Miss Monroe. I knew this might not be simple when I came here." "You came here alone?" Delilah stared at him in disbelief. "You walked into Silas Thornton's town with just 2 other deputies to arrest him?" Something that might have been amusement flickered in Marcus's eyes. "When you put it that way, it does sound a bit foolish, but I have been in worse spots." "That is not reassuring," Delilah said, and despite everything, she almost smiled. "I will be fine, but I need to know you are somewhere safe. Please, Miss Monroe, let Deputy Carter take you to Mrs. Chen's." Delilah wanted to argue, but she could hear shouting starting from the direction of the jail. Whatever was about to happen, she would only be in the way. She nodded reluctantly. "Be careful." "Always am," Marcus said, though the look the other deputy gave him suggested that was not entirely true. Then he was moving, heading toward the trouble with that same easy confidence he had walked into the chapel with. Deputy Carter, a younger man with nervous eyes, offered Delilah his arm. "Come on, miss, let us get you somewhere safe." The boarding house with the blue door was only 3 buildings down, but it felt like miles. Delilah kept looking back over her shoulder, trying to see what was happening. She could hear more shouting now, and her stomach twisted with anxiety. Marcus had saved her, had appeared like an answer to prayers she had stopped believing would be heard. The thought of him being hurt or killed because he had helped her was unbearable. Mrs. Chen turned out to be a small, sturdy woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an instant understanding of the situation. She took one look at Delilah in her wedding dress and at the deputy's worried face and ushered them both inside. "Trouble?" "Yes, madam," Deputy Carter said. "Marshal Everett asked if you could look after Miss Monroe here while we sort out the situation with Thornton's men." "Of course. Come, child." Mrs. Chen took Delilah's arm and guided her toward a comfortable sitting room. "Deputy, you should go help your marshal. I can take care of this one." After the deputy left, Mrs. Chen brought Delilah a glass of cool water and helped her out of the suffocating wedding dress into a simple cotton day dress that belonged to one of the other boarders. The relief of being able to breathe properly again was almost enough to make Delilah cry again. Almost. "Now, Mrs. Chen said, settling into a chair across from Delilah, "you are the girl Thornton was forcing to marry him." It was not a question, but Delilah nodded anyway. "He said it was to pay my father's gambling debt." "Your father's debt that Silas created by cheating at cards. We all knew he was doing it, but no one dared say anything. Thornton owns too much around here." Mrs. Chen shook her head. "That marshal is either very brave or very stupid for coming here to arrest him." "Maybe both," Delilah said quietly, thinking of Marcus's calm, gray-green eyes. They heard the first gunshot about 10 minutes later. Delilah jumped to her feet, her heart hammering. Mrs. Chen caught her arm before she could run toward the door. "You cannot help him, child. You will only make things worse if you go out there. But nothing. That man risked a lot to help you. The least you can do is respect his wishes and stay safe." "Mrs." Chen's grip was surprisingly strong. "Sit down. We will know when it is over." It was the longest half hour of Delilah's life. More gunshots rang out, followed by shouting, something that sounded like breaking glass. She paced the sitting room like a caged animal, her mind conjuring terrible scenarios. What if Marcus was shot? What if Silas's men overwhelmed them? What if this brief moment of freedom was about to be snatched away again? Finally, the sounds of conflict faded. The waiting was somehow worse than the noise. Delilah stood by the window, her fingers gripping the curtain, trying to see anything through the dusty glass. Mrs. Chen sat calmly in her chair, hands folded, as if gunfights outside her boarding house were a regular occurrence. Maybe in Quartzsite they were. When the knock came at the door, Delilah nearly jumped out of her skin. Mrs. Chen rose smoothly and went to answer it. Delilah heard Marcus's voice, low and tired, and then he was in the doorway of the sitting room, looking dusty and worn, but whole. "It is over," he said simply. "Thornton's men scattered once they realized we were not going to back down. A few of them were wanted for other crimes, so we arrested them. The rest ran. Silas is in a locked cell, and we have got guards posted. He will be on a wagon to Yuma first thing tomorrow morning." Delilah crossed the room, without thinking, without planning what she was going to say or do. She just knew she needed to see for herself that he was all right. Up close, she could see a cut on his cheekbone, and his knuckles were scraped. "You are hurt." This is nothing." Marcus smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "You should see the other fellow. That is not funny. You could have been killed. But I was not." His voice gentled. "I told you I would come back when it was done. I keep my word, Miss Monroe." "Mrs." Chen cleared her throat. "I will get some bandages and ointment for those cuts. You two stay here." She disappeared into another room, leaving them alone. Delilah realized she was standing very close to Marcus, close enough to see the gold flecks in his eyes and the faint scar on his jaw. She should step back, should give him space, but her feet would not move. "Thank you. I do not know how to properly thank you for what you did today." "You do not need to thank me. It is my job." "Is it your job to walk into dangerous situations alone and face down armed criminals?" "Sometimes, yes." Marcus studied her face like he was trying to memorize it. "Though, I will admit, this particular situation was more complicated than most." "Why?" Delilah asked. "Why did you come yourself? You are a deputy marshal. Could you not have sent someone else?" Something flickered in Marcus's expression, something he tried to hide, but was not quite fast enough. "When I read the report about what Thornton was doing, about you being forced into a marriage to pay a rigged debt, I could not just send someone else. I had to make sure you got out of that situation safely. But why? You do not even know me." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said softly, "My mother was forced into a marriage when she was 19. The man was cruel. She had no way out, no one to help her. By the time my father came along and fell in love with her, she had been trapped for 3 years. My father challenged her husband to a duel to free her. He won, but he was badly wounded. Took him months to recover." He met Delilah's eyes. "When I became a lawman, I swore I would never let someone be forced into that kind of situation if I had the power to stop it. So when I heard about you, I came myself. I had to." Delilah felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Your father must have been a brave man." "He was. He died 5 years ago. But he and my mother had 20 good years together. She always said he gave her back her life." Marcus smiled slightly. "I like to think he would have approved of today." "I think he would have been proud," Delilah said quietly. Mrs. Chen returned with bandages and a bottle of ointment, breaking the moment. She fussed over Marcus's injuries with the efficiency of someone who had treated many such wounds before. While she worked, Deputy Carter appeared at the door with an update about prisoner transport arrangements and guard schedules. The practical matters of law enforcement reasserted themselves, pulling Marcus back into his role. But his eyes kept finding Delilah's across the room, and each time their gazes met, she felt something warm unfold in her chest. As evening fell over Quartzsite, the situation began to settle into something resembling calm. Silas was securely locked up. His men had scattered or been arrested, and the town was buzzing with gossip about the dramatic events. Mrs. Chen insisted that Delilah stay at the boarding house for the night, and Marcus agreed it was the safest option until Silas was transported out of town. "I will be staying here too," Marcus said. "Mrs. Chen has a room available, and I want to be close in case there is any more trouble." "You think Thornton might try something?" Delilah asked. "I think desperate men do desperate things. I would rather be cautious." Marcus glanced at Mrs. Chen. "If that is acceptable to you, madam, I have a room at the top of the stairs, clean sheets, decent bed. It is yours for the night, Marshal." Mrs. Chen looked between Marcus and Delilah with an expression that suggested she saw more than either of them realized. "Dinner is in an hour, nothing fancy, just stew and bread, but it is hot and filling." After Marcus went upstairs to wash up and change his shirt, Delilah helped Mrs. Chen prepare dinner in the boarding house kitchen. The simple domestic task felt surreal after the chaos of the day. Her hands moved automatically, chopping vegetables and stirring the pot, while her mind tried to catch up with her new reality. "That Marshal," Mrs. Chen said after a while, her tone casual but her eyes knowing. "He is a good man." "He saved me," Delilah said simply. "He did more than that. He walked into a dangerous situation because he believed it was right. That kind of courage is rare." Mrs. Chen added salt to the stew, tasted it, nodded in satisfaction. "And the way he looks at you is not just the look of a lawman who saved a victim. Just so you know." Delilah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You are imagining things. I am old, child, not blind. That man came all the way to Quartzsite because your situation reminded him of his mother's pain. That is not just doing a job. That is personal." Mrs. Chen gave her a shrewd look. "And you look at him the same way." "I barely know him," Delilah protested, but even she could hear how weak it sounded. "You know he is brave. You know he is honest. You know he keeps his word and will risk himself to help someone who needs it. That is more than some people learn about their spouses after years of marriage." Mrs. Chen patted her hand. "I am not saying you should marry the man tomorrow, but do not pretend you do not feel something. Life is too short and too hard out here to deny when something good appears." Delilah did not know what to say to that, so she focused on the stew and tried not to think about the warmth she had felt standing close to Marcus, or the way his eyes had softened when he looked at her. Dinner was a quiet affair. Besides Delilah and Marcus, there were 3 other boarders: an older prospector who spent most of the meal talking about silver veins, a young school teacher who had just arrived in town, and a traveling salesman passing through on his way to Tucson. Marcus sat across from Delilah, and she was acutely aware of every time their eyes met, every time he passed her the breadbasket or their fingers brushed, reaching for the water pitcher. After dinner, Marcus stepped outside to check on the guards at the jail, and Delilah found herself following him without consciously deciding to. The night air was still warm, but not as oppressively hot as the day had been. The sky was huge and dark, scattered with more stars than seemed possible. Marcus turned when he heard her footsteps. "Could not sleep? I have not tried yet. I am not sure I could." Delilah wrapped her arms around herself, though she was not cold. "Everything feels strange, like I am waiting for someone to tell me it was all a mistake and I have to go back to the chapel." "It was not a mistake, and you are not going back." Marcus's voice was firm. "Silas Thornton will stand trial, and based on the evidence we have, he will spend a long time in prison. He cannot hurt you anymore." "What about my father?" "What about him?" Delilah struggled to find the words. "He is the one who gambled away everything we had. He is the one who agreed to Silas's terms when he could not pay. Part of me is so angry at him, I can barely stand it. But another part of me just wants him to be the father he used to be before my mother died." "Those two things can both be true," Marcus said gently. "You can be angry at him and still love him. People are complicated." "Were you angry at your mother for being trapped in that marriage?" "No. I was angry at the world that let it happen. Angry at the man who forced her into it. Angry at everyone who knew and did nothing to help her." Marcus leaned against the porch railing, his profile stark in the lamplight from the window. "But never at her. None of it was her fault." "None of this is your fault either," he added, turning to look at Delilah directly. "I need you to know that. Whatever your father did, however this situation came about, you are not responsible. You were just trying to survive." Delilah felt tears prick her eyes again. She had cried more today than in the past 3 months combined, but these tears felt different. Cleaner, somehow, like they were washing away something toxic that had been building up inside her. "I thought I was going to have to go through with it, marry him, spend the rest of my life trapped with a man who looked at me like I was property he had won. But you did not have to, and you never will." Marcus reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "You are free, Delilah. I know it will take time for that to feel real, but it is true." It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it in his voice did something to her. She found herself stepping closer, drawn by something she could not name and did not want to fight. "I feel safe with you. I have not felt safe in so long, and then you walked into that chapel and everything changed." "I am glad I could help," Marcus said, his voice rough. "It is more than that." Delilah looked up at him, at this man who had upended his life to save hers, who had walked into danger because his conscience would not let him do otherwise. "Mrs. Chen said you look at me in a way that is not just a lawman looking at someone he helped." Marcus went very still. "Mrs. Chen is a perceptive woman. Is she right?" For a long moment, Marcus did not answer. Then he said, carefully, "When I first read the file on your case, you were just a name on paper, a victim who needed help. But when I walked into that chapel today and saw you standing there, trapped and terrified, but still standing, still fighting, even though you knew you were out of options, something shifted. And then I carried you out, and you looked at me with those eyes. And He stopped, shook his head. "This is not appropriate. You just escaped a forced marriage. The last thing you need is another man making demands on you." "You are not making demands," Delilah said. "You are being honest. I wish more people were honest. The honest truth is that I have not been able to stop thinking about you since I carried you out of that chapel, and that is my problem to deal with, not yours. You do not owe me anything just because I did my job. What if I want it to be more than just you doing your job?" The words were out before Delilah could second-guess them. "What if I feel the same way?" Marcus's eyes widened slightly. "Delilah, I know it is fast. I know it does not make logical sense. But when I thought you might be hurt today, when I heard those gunshots and did not know if you were safe, I felt something I have never felt before. And when you came back and you were all right, She took a breath. "I do not know what this is or what it means, but I know I do not want you to leave tomorrow and never see you again." Marcus looked at her like she was something precious and fragile. "I have to take Silas to Yuma. That is not negotiable." "I know. But after I deliver him to the territorial prison, I could come back, if you wanted me to." Delilah felt hope bloom in her chest. I would want that. You should go to your aunt's boarding house. Be with your father, figure out what you want your life to look like now that you are free to choose. And if, after you have had time to think and heal, you still want to see me, I will come back." Marcus reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "But I will not rush you. You have been through too much to make any big decisions right now." "What if my decision is that I want you to come back?" Delilah asked. "Then I will come back. I promise you that." They stood there in the warm Arizona night, hands linked, the stars wheeling overhead in their ancient patterns. Delilah knew Marcus was right. She needed time, needed space to figure out who she was now that she was not trapped. But she also knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that this man who had saved her was going to be important to her life. However that unfolded, wherever it led, Marcus Everett had changed everything. The next morning came too quickly. Delilah woke to sunlight streaming through the window of her borrowed room, and the sounds of the boarding house coming to life. For a confused moment, she thought she had dreamed everything: the interrupted wedding, Marcus's arrival, the freedom he had given her. Then she saw the wedding dress crumpled in the corner, and reality settled back in. She dressed quickly in another borrowed dress from Mrs. Chen and went downstairs. Marcus was already in the dining room, eating breakfast with Deputy Carter and the other deputy, whose name she had learned was Reynolds. They looked tired but satisfied, the look of men who had completed a difficult job successfully. Marcus looked up when she entered, and his face softened. "Good morning. Did you sleep?" "Some. You." "Enough." He gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Mrs. Chen made eggs and biscuits. You should eat." Delilah sat, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. She had barely eaten anything the day before, her stomach too twisted with fear. Now, with freedom settling into her bones, her appetite had returned. She ate while the deputies discussed logistics for the prisoner transport. Silas would be loaded into a reinforced wagon within the hour, accompanied by all 3 lawmen for security. It was a 2-day journey to Yuma. "Miss Monroe," Deputy Reynolds said, addressing her formally, "we have arranged for you to travel to Yuma as well, if you wish. There is a stage leaving this afternoon. Your father has been notified that you are safe, and he is eager to see you." The thought of seeing her father stirred complicated emotions. Delilah was not sure if she wanted to hug him or scream at him. Maybe both, but she also knew she could not stay in Quartzsite. This town was too full of Silas Thornton's influence, too full of people who had watched her be forced toward marriage and done nothing. "I will take the stage," she said quietly. Marcus looked at her, his expression unreadable. "That is probably for the best. Your aunt runs a good establishment, and you will be safe there while everything gets sorted out. When will you—" Delilah stopped, suddenly aware that the deputies were listening. "When will the trial be?" "Few months, probably. The territorial courts move slowly, but with the evidence we have, there should not be much doubt about the outcome." Marcus's eyes held hers. "I will make sure you are notified when it is scheduled. You may need to testify." The thought of facing Silas again, even in a courtroom, made Delilah's stomach clench, but she nodded. "I will do whatever is needed." After breakfast, things moved quickly. The wagon was brought around, and Silas was transferred from the jail with far more security than seemed necessary for one aging criminal. But when Delilah saw him, she understood. Silas's eyes were full of hate, and he stared at her with such venom that she took an involuntary step back. "This is not over," Silas hissed as the deputies loaded him into the wagon. "You are mine, girl. You owe me." "She owes you nothing," Marcus said coldly, stepping between Silas and Delilah. "And if you threaten her again, I will add it to the charges against you. Now, shut up and get in the wagon." Silas spat on the ground near Marcus's feet, but subsided into sullen silence. As the deputies secured him, Marcus turned to Delilah. "I am sorry you had to hear that." "It is all right. He cannot hurt me now." Delilah was surprised to find she actually believed it. Silas was just a bitter old man headed for prison. Whatever power he had held over her was gone. "No, he cannot." Marcus glanced over his shoulder at the wagon, then back at Delilah. "I need to go, but I meant what I said last night. After I deliver him and handle the paperwork, I will come to Yuma, if you want me to." "I want you to," Delilah said firmly. Marcus smiled, that transformative expression that made him look younger and less careworn. Then, I will see you in a few weeks. He wanted to say more. She could see it in his eyes, but the deputies were waiting and the sun was climbing higher. Instead, he reached out and squeezed her hand once, briefly, and then he was swinging up onto his horse and the wagon was rolling out, dust rising in its wake. Delilah stood in the street and watched until they disappeared from view, her hand still warm from his touch. The stage to Yuma was not crowded. Besides Delilah, there were only two other passengers, an older woman traveling to visit her daughter, and a businessman with papers spread across his lap that he studied with intense focus. The journey would take most of 2 days, with stops at way stations for fresh horses and brief rests. As Quartzsite disappeared behind them, Delilah felt the tight knot in her chest begin to loosen. She was leaving behind the worst 3 months of her life. Whatever lay ahead in Yuma, it had to be better than what she was leaving behind. The landscape rolled past in shades of brown and red and dusty green. The heat was relentless, making the air shimmer in waves. Delilah leaned her head against the window frame and let her mind drift. She thought about Marcus, about the way he had appeared like an answer to a prayer. She thought about her father and what she would say to him when she saw him. She thought about freedom and what it actually meant now that she had it. They stopped at a way station as the sun was setting, a ramshackle building that offered terrible coffee and mediocre food, but clean beds. Delilah lay awake for a long time that night, listening to the sounds of the desert and thinking about gray-green eyes and a voice that said, "You are free now," like it was a sacred vow. Yuma came into view late in the afternoon of the second day. It was bigger than Quartzsite, sprawling along the Colorado River like it could not quite decide if it wanted to be a real town or not. The territorial prison loomed on a hill overlooking the river, its stone walls looking impenetrable in the harsh sunlight. The stage let her off in front of a hotel, and Delilah stood for a moment, clutching her small bag and trying to remember the address her father's letter had mentioned. Monroe Boarding House, on 3rd Street near the Methodist Church. She asked directions from a woman sweeping the boardwalk and was pointed toward the eastern part of town. The boarding house was a neat 2-story building, with a well-maintained garden in front and lace curtains in the windows. Delilah stood outside for a long moment, gathering her courage, before she climbed the steps and knocked. The woman who answered was in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun and her father's eyes. Aunt Catherine, who Delilah had not seen since she was 12 years old. Recognition flashed across Catherine's face, followed immediately by compassion. "Delilah, oh my dear girl, come in." Then Delilah was being pulled into a tight hug, and the tears she had been holding back since leaving Quartzsite finally came. Catherine held her and made soothing sounds and did not ask any questions, just let her cry until she had no tears left. "Your father is in the back garden," Catherine said eventually, once Delilah had calmed down. "He has been watching for the stage all day, but I think he is afraid to see you, afraid you will not forgive him." "I do not know if I can," Delilah said honestly. "That is fair, but perhaps you should at least talk to him." Catherine squeezed her shoulder gently. "Whatever you decide, you have a home here, as long as you need one. You are my niece, and I should have done more to help you before things got so bad. I am sorry I did not. You did not know how bad it was. I knew your father was drinking and gambling after your mother died. I should have intervened sooner." Catherine shook her head. "But dwelling on what should have been does not help. Come, let us get you settled, and then you can decide if you are ready to see him." The room Catherine showed her to was small but clean, with a window overlooking the garden. Delilah could see her father from here, sitting on a bench under a cottonwood tree, his head in his hands. He looked older than she remembered, thinner, like the weight of his guilt had physically diminished him. She washed her face and changed into one of the dresses Catherine provided, and then, before she could lose her nerve, she went downstairs and out to the garden. Her father looked up when he heard her footsteps. For a moment, they just stared at each other, and Delilah saw her own complicated emotions reflected in his face. Love, guilt, shame, hope, fear, all tangled together. "Delilah," he said finally, his voice cracking, "I am so sorry." "Sorry does not fix what you did," Delilah said, but her voice was not as harsh as she had expected it to be. "You gambled me away like I was a possession. You were going to let me marry that monster. I know, and there is no excuse. After your mother died, I just—" He stopped, shook his head. "I fell apart. The drinking, the gambling, it was like I was trying to destroy myself. I never meant to drag you down with me. But you did." Delilah sat down on the bench, leaving space between them. "Do you have any idea what the last 3 months were like? Knowing what was coming and being powerless to stop it? I thought about it every day, and every day I hated myself more." Her father looked at his hands. "Catherine got me sober. She is tough, your aunt. Did not let me have so much as a drop. Made me work in the boarding house, kept me busy so I could not think about cards. And all I could think about was you, Wand, and what I had done to you, and how I would never be able to make it right." "You cannot make it right," Delilah said flatly, "but you can try to be better. You can stay sober. You can be the father you were before Mother died." "I want that. I want to be that man again." He finally looked at her directly. "Can you give me a chance to prove it?" Delilah thought about Marcus's words, about how anger and love could exist together. She was furious at her father for what he had done, but she also remembered the man he had been before. Grief and alcohol had twisted him into someone unrecognizable. That man had taught her to ride horses and read by lamplight, and had always made her feel safe and loved. "One chance," she said finally. "But if you take one drink, if you touch one deck of cards, I am done. I will not watch you destroy yourself again, and I definitely will not let you drag me down with you." Relief flooded her father's face. "One chance. That is more than I deserve. Thank you, Delilah." They sat in silence for a while, the evening air cooling slightly as the sun dipped toward the horizon. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start, and that was enough for now. Over the next few weeks, Delilah settled into a routine at the boarding house. She helped Catherine with the cooking and cleaning, got to know the various boarders who came and went, and slowly began to figure out who she was now that she was not living in constant fear. Her father kept his word. He stayed sober, worked hard at the odd jobs Catherine found for him, and did not go near anything resembling a gambling hall. Delilah found herself thinking about Marcus more than she probably should. She wondered if he had delivered Silas safely to the prison, if he had encountered any trouble on the road, when he would come back like he had promised. Every time there was a knock at the door, her heart would jump, hoping it might be him. It was 3 weeks after her arrival in Yuma when Marcus finally appeared. Delilah was in the front garden, pulling weeds in the afternoon heat, when she heard bootsteps on the walkway. She looked up, squinting against the sun, and there he was. He looked travel-worn and tired, dust coating his clothes and stubble darkening his jaw. But when he saw her, his face lit up with that smile that made her heart stutter. "Hello," he said simply. Delilah stood, brushing dirt from her hands, suddenly very aware of her work dress and probably dirt-smudged face. "You came back." "I said I would." Marcus took a few steps closer. "I delivered Thornton to the prison. He is in a cell, awaiting trial. Your testimony will not be needed after all his foreman and 2 other witnesses provided enough evidence to convict him 3 times over." "So it is really over?" "It is really over. Silas Thornton is going to spend the rest of his life in prison." Marcus's expression grew serious. "How are you?" "Really?" "Better, stronger." Delilah looked at him, at this man who had kept his promise. "My father is sober. My aunt has given me a place to stay. I am starting to figure out what my life can be now." "That is good. I am glad." Marcus hesitated, then said, "I was not sure if you would still want to see me. 3 weeks is a long time. You might have realized that what you felt was just gratitude, not anything more." "It is not just gratitude," Delilah said firmly. "I have had 3 weeks to think about it, and I still wanted you to come back. I still felt the same way." Relief and something warmer crossed Marcus's face. "I am glad because I have not been able to stop thinking about you. The whole ride back, I kept wondering if I was crazy for coming here instead of heading back to my regular territory." "Are you? Crazy, I mean?" "Probably." Marcus smiled. "But I do not care. Can I take you to dinner, somewhere we can talk without your aunt and father watching through the windows?" Delilah glanced at the house and saw curtains twitching suspiciously. "They are not subtle, are they?" "Not even a little bit. So, dinner? I would like that very much." Marcus took her to a small restaurant near the river, a place that served decent steaks and had a porch overlooking the water. They sat outside as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and talked. really talked in a way they had not been able to before, with danger and urgency pressing down on them. Delilah learned that Marcus had grown up in Colorado, that he had become a lawman because his father's sacrifice had inspired him, that he loved the work but sometimes felt tired of the violence and corruption he saw. Marcus learned that Delilah had wanted to be a teacher before her mother died and everything fell apart, that she loved reading and horses and the way the desert looked after rain, that she was stronger than she had ever known she could be. "What will you do now?" Marcus asked as their meal wound down. "Stay here with your aunt?" "For a while, yes. I need to figure some things out. But I was thinking—" Delilah hesitated, then pushed forward. "There is a school in Yuma looking for a teacher. The previous one moved back east. I thought I might apply." "You should. You would be a wonderful teacher." "How do you know that?" "Because you are patient and kind and you care about people. Those are the most important qualities." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. "And because when you talk about teaching, your whole face lights up. You should do things that make you light up like that." Delilah felt warmth spread through her chest. "What about you? Where will you go?" "Back to my territory for a while. I have cases that need attention, but—" He paused, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "I was thinking I could come back to Yuma between assignments, if you wanted me to." "I want you to," Delilah said. "Very much." They stayed on that porch until the stars came out, talking and holding hands and slowly building the foundation of something real. When Marcus finally walked her back to the boarding house, he stopped at the gate and turned to face her. "I want to court you properly," he said. "No rushing, no pressure. I want you to have time to heal and figure out who you are. But I also want you to know that I am serious about this. About you." "I am serious too," Delilah said. She stepped closer, looking up at him in the lamplight from the house. "I know it is fast. I know it does not make logical sense, but I have never felt this way about anyone, and I do not want to lose it." Marcus reached up and cupped her face gently. "You are not going to lose it. I promise you that." Then he leaned down and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. It was Delilah's first real kiss, the first one she had chosen for herself, and it felt like freedom and hope and coming home all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I will come back in 2 weeks," Marcus said, "and then we will figure this out together, all right?" "All right," Delilah agreed. She watched him walk away into the darkness, her heart full in a way it had not been since before her mother died. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, that did not scare her. Because whatever came next, she knew Marcus would be part of it. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. Marcus would leave for his territory, handling cases and enforcing the law across a vast stretch of Arizona. He would be gone for 2 or 3 weeks, and then he would return to Yuma, and Delilah would feel like she could breathe properly again. They would spend his time off together, taking long walks along the river, sharing meals, talking about everything and nothing. Slowly, carefully, they built something solid. Delilah got the teaching position at the school, and she threw herself into the work with a passion that surprised her. The children loved her, and she loved them right back, finding joy in watching them learn and grow. Her father continued to stay sober, slowly rebuilding himself into someone Delilah could respect again. Catherine's boarding house became a real home, and through it all, Marcus was there. Not constantly, not smotheringly, but present in the way that mattered. He wrote her letters when he was away, long, rambling accounts of his cases and thoughts that made her feel connected to him even across the distance. When he was in Yuma, they spent every moment they could together. 6 months after that first dinner by the river, Marcus asked Catherine for permission to marry Delilah. Catherine, who had watched their courtship with approval, gave her blessing immediately. But Marcus did not propose right away. Instead, he waited until he and Delilah were on their favorite spot along the river, the sun setting in glory across the water. "I want to marry you," he said. No preamble, just honest truth. "I want to build a life with you, but I need you to be absolutely sure. I need you to know that this is your choice, completely and entirely." Delilah looked at this man who had saved her, who had kept every promise, who had courted her with patience and kindness and genuine love. "I am sure. I have been sure for months." "Then will you marry me?" "Yes," Delilah said, and kissed him as the sun painted the sky in colors that had no names. They were married 3 months later, in the fall of 1883, in the Methodist church with Catherine and Delilah's father, and half the town in attendance. Delilah wore a simple blue dress that Catherine had helped her make, and Marcus wore his best suit. And when the preacher asked if Delilah took this man, she said, "I do," in a strong, clear voice that held no doubt. The kiss they shared as husband and wife was met with applause and cheering. As they walked back down the aisle together, Marcus leaned close and whispered, "No regrets?" "Not a single one," Delilah said truthfully. They moved into a small house on the edge of Yuma, close enough to Catherine's boarding house that Delilah could visit often, but far enough to have their own space. Marcus continued his work as a deputy marshal, though he requested assignments that kept him closer to Yuma. Delilah continued teaching, finding fulfillment in shaping young minds. Their first year of marriage was not always easy. There were times when Marcus was called away on dangerous assignments, and Delilah had to wait and worry, not knowing if he would come home safe. There were times when Delilah's lingering trauma from her ordeal with Silas would surface, and she would wake gasping from nightmares. But they worked through it together, learning how to be partners in the fullest sense of the word. 2 years into their marriage, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complicated mix of joy and terror. She had never really thought about children before, too focused on survival and then on healing. But as her belly swelled and she felt the baby move inside her, she found herself excited about this new chapter. Marcus was over the moon. He fussed over her constantly, much to Delilah's amusement and occasional annoyance. He cut back on his martial duties even further, wanting to be close as her due date approached. Their son was born on a cool March morning in 1886. Delilah had never experienced pain like labor, but when Marcus placed their son in her arms, red-faced and squalling, she felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. They named him James, after Marcus's father. Little James had his father's gray-green eyes and his mother's dark hair, and from the moment he entered the world, he was loved beyond measure. Watching Marcus with their son did something to Delilah. The gentle way he held James, the soft voice he used when the baby was fussy, the fierce protectiveness in his eyes, it all reminded her of why she had fallen in love with him in the first place. Marcus was strong and brave, but he was also tender and kind, and their son would grow up knowing what a good man looked like. When James was 6 months old, Marcus came home one evening with news. "The territorial governor is offering me a position as chief deputy marshal for the Southern Territory. It would mean better pay, more stability, and less time away from home." "That sounds wonderful," Delilah said, bouncing James on her hip. "What is the catch?" "We would need to move to Tucson. That is where the main office is." Marcus studied her face. "I know you love teaching here, and your aunt is here, and your father. I told the governor I needed to discuss it with you before making any decisions." Delilah considered. Tucson was bigger than Yuma, which meant more opportunities. The school system there was more developed, which could be good for her teaching career. But leaving Catherine and her father, leaving the town where she had rebuilt her life, was not an easy choice. "Can we go visit Tucson before deciding?" she asked finally. "See what it is like? What opportunities are there?" "Of course. I would not ask you to make this decision blind." They made the trip a month later, leaving James with Catherine, who was delighted to have her great-nephew to herself for a few days. Tucson was indeed bigger than Yuma, more developed, with actual paved streets and brick buildings. The school system had multiple teachers and a proper curriculum. The deputy marshal office was well-funded and organized. As they explored the town, Delilah found herself getting excited about the possibilities. This could be a fresh start, a new adventure. And as much as she loved Yuma, she loved Marcus more. Where he went, she wanted to go. "Let us do it," she said on their last evening in Tucson, as they sat in a restaurant overlooking the mountains. "Let us move here. It will be good for all of us." Marcus's face lit up. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. This is our family now, and we make decisions together. If this is good for your career and keeps you safer and closer to home, then it is the right choice." They moved to Tucson in the fall of 1886. Settling into a larger house with room for their growing family. Delilah found a position at the largest school in town, teaching older children now instead of the younger ones she had worked with in Yuma. Marcus threw himself into his new role, working to clean up corruption and improve law enforcement across the Southern Territory. Life in Tucson was good. They made friends, became part of the community, watched James grow from a baby, into a toddler with his father's smile and his mother's determination. Catherine visited often, and Delilah's father came too, staying sober and slowly becoming the grandfather James deserved. 3 years after James was born, Delilah had another baby, a daughter they named Catherine after her aunt. Little Catherine had her mother's eyes and her father's steady temperament, and James was fascinated by his baby sister. The years rolled on, filled with the ordinary joys and challenges of family life. James started school and showed an early aptitude for reading, making his teacher mother proud. Catherine grew into a sweet-natured child who loved animals and music. Marcus rose through the ranks, eventually becoming the territorial marshal for all of southern Arizona, a position that came with responsibility but also respect. Sometimes, usually late at night when the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Delilah would think back to that terrible day in the chapel in Quartzsite. She would remember the fear, the trapped feeling, the certainty that her life was over before it had really begun. And then she would look at the life she had built, the home full of love, the meaningful work, the husband who still made her heart race after all these years, and she would be grateful beyond words that Marcus had walked through those chapel doors. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked one such night, finding her on their porch watching the stars. "That day you saved me," Delilah said honestly. "How different my life would be if you had not come." Marcus came to stand beside her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "You would have survived. You are stronger than you know." "Maybe, but I would not have this. I would not have you, or James, or Catherine, or any of it." She leaned into him, comfortable after all these years. "You gave me more than freedom that day. You gave me a future worth living." "You gave me one too," Marcus said softly. "I was just going through the motions before I met you. Doing my job, enforcing the law, but not really living. You changed that. You made me want more than just the next case, the next criminal to catch. You made me want a home." They stood together in the warm Arizona night, watching the stars and counting their blessings. Two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment and built something beautiful from the ashes of trauma and fear. When Catherine was 5 and James was 8, Marcus was offered the position of United States Marshal for the entire Arizona territory. It was a huge honor, one that would put him in charge of all federal law enforcement efforts in the region. But it would also mean more time in an office and less time in the field, which, after years of dangerous work, sounded pretty good. He accepted the position, and the family celebrated with a special dinner and cake that the children devoured with sticky enthusiasm. Delilah was proud of him, proud of how far he had come from that dusty deputy who had walked into a chapel to save a trapped woman. As marshal, Marcus worked to reform the justice system, to make it more fair and accessible to everyone, not just those with money and influence. He remembered too well how Silas Thornton had used wealth and power to victimize people, and he was determined to prevent others from doing the same. His reputation for integrity and fairness spread, and under his leadership, the Arizona Territory became known for its honest law enforcement. Delilah, meanwhile, was promoted to head teacher at her school, overseeing curriculum and mentoring younger teachers. She found joy in this new role, in shaping not just students but other educators. She also started a program to provide books to children from poor families, remembering how much reading had meant to her in dark times. Their children grew. James showed an interest in law like his father, often sitting at the dinner table asking questions about justice and fairness, and how to tell right from wrong. Catherine was more creative, always drawing or making up stories, with a vivid imagination that entertained the whole family. In 1895, when Delilah was 33 and Marcus was 40, they welcomed their third and final child, a son they named Thomas. He was a surprise, arriving a decade after Catherine, but a welcome one. James and Catherine doted on their baby brother, and Thomas grew up surrounded by love and protection. By this time, Marcus had been marshal for several years, and his influence had transformed law enforcement in the territory. Crime was down, public trust in the legal system was up, and Arizona was on track to become a state within the next few decades. Marcus was often mentioned as a potential candidate for governor once statehood arrived, but he always deflected such talk. He liked the work he was doing and saw no reason to pursue political office. Delilah's teaching career also flourished. She became known as one of the best educators in the territory, and teachers came from across Arizona to learn her methods. She never forgot where she had come from, though. In her classroom, she made sure every child felt valued and safe, especially those who seemed scared or trapped by circumstances beyond their control. One autumn evening when Thomas was 3, Delilah received a letter that made her hands shake. It was from the warden at Yuma Territorial Prison, informing her that Silas Thornton had died of pneumonia. The man who had tried to force her into marriage, who had haunted her nightmares for years after his imprisonment, was gone. Marcus found her sitting at the kitchen table, the letter in her hand, tears streaming down her face. "What happened?" he asked, immediately concerned. "Silas is dead," she said, her voice thick. Marcus took the letter, read it quickly, then pulled Delilah into his arms. "It is over. He can never hurt you again, not even in your fears. I know, it is not sad tears, it is just—" Delilah struggled to find the words. "It feels like closing a door that I did not even realize was still open. He has been in prison all these years, and I built this whole life, and I thought I was past it, but knowing he was still out there somewhere, even locked up, was like a shadow. And now that shadow is gone." "How do you feel?" Marcus asked gently. "Free," Delilah said. "Really, truly free. For the first time since that day in the chapel." They sat together in the kitchen, holding each other, until Thomas toddled in, demanding attention, and life reasserted itself in the form of a 3-year-old who wanted cookies before dinner. The years continued to pass, marked by birthdays and holidays, school events and work milestones, the ordinary precious moments that make up a life well lived. James grew into a young man with his father's sense of justice and his mother's compassion, eventually following Marcus into law enforcement. Catherine discovered a talent for teaching and decided to follow in her mother's footsteps, training to become an educator. Thomas was still young, full of energy and curiosity, keeping everyone on their toes. Delilah's father passed away peacefully in 1899, sober to the end and having made his peace with his daughter. At his funeral, Delilah cried for the man he had been before grief had broken him, and for the man he had fought so hard to become again. Catherine was there, solid and supportive, reminding Delilah that family was not just about blood, but about who showed up when it mattered. As the new century dawned, Marcus and Delilah found themselves looking back on nearly 2 decades of marriage with wonder. They had built a life that neither of them could have imagined that day in Quartzsite, a life full of love and purpose and meaning. "Do you ever regret it?" Delilah asked Marcus one night as they prepared for bed. "Marrying me, taking on all the complications that came with my situation?" Marcus looked at her like she had grown a second head. "Regret marrying you? Delilah, you were the best thing that ever happened to me. How could I possibly regret it? I just wonder sometimes. You could have had a simpler life, a less complicated wife. I could have had a lot of things, but I would not trade what we have for anything." Marcus crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. "You made me better. You gave me a reason to come home. You gave me a family and a life worth living. How is any of that something to regret?" "I love you," Delilah said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she said them. "I love you too. Always have, always will." In 1903, James married a young woman named Sarah who worked as a nurse in Tucson. The wedding was a joyful affair, reminding Marcus and Delilah of their own wedding years before. Watching their son make his vows, seeing the love in his eyes for Sarah, filled them both with pride and happiness. Catherine was courted by a young teacher who had studied under Delilah, a kind man named William who loved literature and classical music. Their courtship was sweet and gentle, and when William asked Marcus for permission to marry Catherine, Marcus gave his blessing with enthusiasm. Thomas, now 11, was showing signs of wanting to be a doctor, fascinated by how the human body worked and always asking questions about medicine and healing. Delilah and Marcus encouraged this interest, knowing their youngest would find his own path in time. As Arizona moved toward statehood, Marcus was indeed approached about running for governor. After much discussion with Delilah, he declined. He was content with the work he was doing as marshal, and at 50 he was looking forward to eventually retiring and spending more time with his growing family rather than starting a new, demanding political career. Catherine married William in 1905, a beautiful spring wedding that had Delilah crying happy tears throughout the ceremony. Watching her daughter promise her life to someone who loved her, who would cherish and respect her, Delilah remembered her own interrupted wedding and felt grateful all over again for Marcus's intervention. James and Sarah gave them their first grandchild in 1906, a little girl named Emma, who had Sarah's blonde curls and James's gray-green eyes. Marcus took to grandfatherhood with enthusiasm, always ready to hold the baby or tell her stories, or just marvel at her tiny fingers and toes. "We are getting old," Delilah said one day, watching Marcus gently rock Emma to sleep. "Speak for yourself. I am distinguished," Marcus replied with a grin. "You are gray," Delilah pointed out. Though she loved the silver in his hair and the laugh lines around his eyes, so are you, and you have never looked more beautiful. It was true. At 44, Delilah had aged, but it was a soft aging, a graceful one. Her face showed the years of joy and love more than the brief period of fear and trauma. She was happy, genuinely happy, and it showed. In 1908, Thomas started medical school in San Francisco, the first in their family to pursue higher education at a university. Marcus and Delilah traveled with him to see him settled, proud of their youngest son for his ambition and dedication. The trip also gave them time alone together, something they had not had in years with children, and work always demanding attention. They took their time traveling back to Tucson, stopping at small towns along the way, revisiting places Marcus had worked years before, and just enjoying each other's company. It felt like a second honeymoon, a reminder that underneath the roles of parents and professionals, they were still the man and woman who had fallen in love by a river in Yuma. "If you could go back and change anything about our life, would you?" Delilah asked as they sat on a beach in Southern California, watching the sun set over the Pacific Ocean. Marcus considered the question seriously. "I would change what happened to you with Silas. I wish you had never had to go through that fear and pain. But if that had not happened, we might never have met." "True, so no, I would not change it, because every path, even the difficult ones, led us here, and here is pretty perfect." Marcus took her hand, their fingers interlacing in a gesture that was as familiar as breathing after all these years. "What about you? Any regrets?" "Not a single one," Delilah said honestly. "Well, maybe one. I wish we had taken more trips like this over the years. We got so caught up in work and raising children that we forgot to just be together sometimes. Then let us make up for lost time. Once Thomas finishes medical school and gets established, what do you say we travel more? See the country, maybe even go to Europe?" "I would love that," Delilah said, and kissed him as the sun painted the sky in impossible colors. They returned to Tucson renewed, ready for whatever came next. Marcus was talking about retiring in a few years, passing the marshal position to someone younger. Delilah had already decided that the upcoming school year would be her last as head teacher. She wanted to spend more time with her grandchildren, wanted to travel with Marcus, wanted to enjoy the life they had built. James and Sarah had 2 more children, boys named Marcus and Daniel, giving them 3 grandchildren to spoil. Catherine and William had twin girls in 1910, Eleanor and Alice, bringing the grandchild count to 5. The house in Tucson was often full of family, loud with the sounds of children playing and adults laughing, and Marcus and Delilah loved every chaotic moment. In 1912, Arizona finally achieved statehood. Marcus was part of the ceremony, honored for his years of service to law enforcement in the territory. He officially retired 6 months later, passing his badge to his chosen successor with pride and relief. After 30 years of law enforcement, he was ready for a quieter life. Delilah had retired from teaching 2 years earlier, and together they settled into a new rhythm. They took trips, visiting Thomas in San Francisco, where he was now a practicing physician, traveling to the East Coast to see historical sites, and even making it to Europe for 3 months in 1914, just before the war broke out. Their golden years were truly golden. They spent time with grandchildren, helped James and Sarah build an addition onto their house, supported Catherine and William when William fell ill with influenza and slowly recovered. They tended a garden at their home in Tucson, read books together in the evenings, and took long walks in the desert, marveling at sunsets that never got old. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1913, James and Catherine threw them a party. The house was full of family and friends, people whose lives Marcus and Delilah had touched over the years. There were former students of Delilah's, now grown with families of their own. There were men who had served under Marcus, who credited him with teaching them what integrity in law enforcement looked like. There was Catherine, now in her 80s but still sharp as a tack, beaming with pride at the life her niece had built. As the party wound down and the last guests left, Marcus and Delilah found themselves alone in their garden under the stars. 30 years, Delilah said, shaking her head in wonder. It went so fast. Best 30 years of my life, Marcus said, pulling her close. Do you remember what you said to me that first day, when you lifted me up in front of the chapel? I said a lot of things that day. You said, "You are free now," like it was a promise. Delilah looked up at him, this man who had kept every promise he had ever made to her. You gave me more than freedom, Marcus. You gave me a life. You gave me love. You gave me everything I did not even know I wanted. We gave each other that, Marcus said softly. I was just going through the motions before you. You made me want to really live. They danced in the garden, just the two of them, with no music except the wind in the trees and the beating of their hearts. 30 years of marriage, of partnership, of love that had weathered every storm and come out stronger. The grandchildren grew. Emma, the oldest, showed an interest in law like her grandfather and father. Marcus mentored her, proud to see another generation carrying on the commitment to justice. The twins, Eleanor and Alice, were inseparable and endlessly creative, reminding everyone of their mother at that age. Marcus Jr. and Daniel were rambunctious boys full of energy, keeping their parents constantly busy. Thomas returned to Arizona in 1916, opening a medical practice in Tucson. He had married during his time in California, a fellow doctor named Helen, and they had a son named Robert. The family was all back together, spread across Tucson, but close enough to see each other regularly. In 1920, Marcus and Delilah celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary, quietly, just the two of them, and a nice dinner at home. Marcus was 63 now, his hair completely silver, his body showing the wear of decades of hard work. But his eyes were still the same gray-green that had captured Delilah's heart all those years ago. And when he looked at her, she still felt like the most cherished woman in the world. Delilah was 58, her own hair streaked with gray, laugh lines deeply etched around her eyes and mouth. She moved a bit slower than she used to, her joints protesting on cold mornings, but she was healthy and happy and surrounded by love. Do you ever think about Quartzsite? Marcus asked that night as they sat on their porch watching the stars. Sometimes, less now than I used to. Delilah took his hand. It feels like a different lifetime, like it happened to someone else. In a way, it did. You are not that scared 20-year-old anymore. No, I am a grandmother, a retired teacher, and a woman who has lived a full life, thanks to you. She squeezed his hand. Thank you for saving me, for loving me, for building this life with me. Thank you for saying yes, for taking a chance on a dusty deputy marshal with more ideals than sense. Marcus smiled. Best decision you ever made. Second best, Delilah corrected. The best decision was saying yes when you proposed. Everything else followed from that. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars wheel overhead. 37 years of marriage, of partnership, of love that had started in the most unlikely circumstances and grown into something beautiful and enduring. The years continued to add up. They celebrated births and birthdays, anniversaries and achievements. They mourned when Catherine, Delilah's aunt, passed away peacefully at 92, having lived long enough to see her great-great-grandchildren. They rejoiced when Emma became the first female deputy marshal in Arizona, following in her grandfather's footsteps. In 1925, Marcus and Delilah celebrated their 42nd anniversary. Marcus was 68, Delilah was 63, and they had 9 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. Their house was still the center of the family, the place everyone gathered for holidays and celebrations. We did all right, didn't we? Marcus said one evening, as they watched their family gathered in the living room, multiple generations laughing and talking and just being together. We did better than all right, Delilah said. We did wonderful. She looked around at the life they had built at James with his arm around Sarah, at Catherine helping Eleanor serve cake, at Thomas showing Robert how to tie a proper knot, at the grandchildren playing, and the great-grandchildren toddling around on uncertain legs. All of this, all of these people in love and joy, had started with a terrifying day in a chapel, and a stranger who had cared enough to stop an injustice. I love you, she said to Marcus, not for the first time and not for the last time, but with all the depth of 42 years of partnership. I love you too, Marcus said, Always have, always will. They sat together on the porch as the sun set over Tucson, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment and built a love story that would echo through generations. The forced bride who had fallen to her knees in despair had risen to a life of freedom and joy, carried by a cowboy who had whispered promises and kept every single one. Their story was not one of fairy tale perfection. There had been hard times and challenges, moments of doubt and fear, but through it all, they had held on to each other, choosing love every single day. And in the end, that was what mattered. Not the dramatic beginning or the obstacles overcome, but the quiet, steady accumulation of days and years, of shared laughter and tears, of a life built together with care and intention and abiding love. As the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, Marcus and Delilah sat hand in hand, grateful for every moment they had been given, every choice that had led them here, every day of their remarkable, improbable, beautiful life together. The chapter that had begun with fear and forced vows had transformed into something neither could have imagined, a love story for the ages, proof that even in the darkest moments, hope and redemption were possible. And when they finally stood and went inside, where their family waited, they did so together, as they had done everything for 42 years. Partners, best friends, and soulmates who had found each other against all odds and built something that would outlast them both, a legacy of love, justice, and the unshakable belief that everyone deserved freedom, dignity, and the chance to write their own story.